Soul Night Live, number 37. Today, my guest is Geoff Downs.
Hey, Sean.
Hey, Geoff. Good morning.
How are you?
Or
Can
I
you hear me
should say
okay?
good afternoon for you.
Yeah, how are you?
Pretty good. It's good to see you.
Yeah, yeah, good to see you too.
Yeah, great to have a chance to catch up. It's been a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see you've got a few guitars around there.
Yeah, that's a few of them. There's more in other parts of the house.
I'm sure,
We
I'm
can never
sure.
have enough.
No, exactly. I
You
say
know,
that with keyboards, but I got nowhere to put them.
how many do you have now, you think?
Oh, God. Well, I've got three rigs that are all pretty much the same. And there's about 10 or 11 rigs in each rig. So,
Uh-huh.
and then I've got quite a few at my studio. So I'm maybe about 50 or so.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
that's not an unusual answer for a
No.
prog keyboard player.
Yeah.
You know,
Can't take them all around with you, mind. Yeah.
yeah, I know a few that like have a warehouse full. It's
I
just,
know. Yeah, I think Rick Wakeman's got a couple of warehouses.
I can imagine he probably has stuff
Yeah,
he doesn't even remember he has.
yeah. Probably just one's just full of mini mugs, probably.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Well, hey, it's really good to see you. Thanks for taking time to be on my new show. It's something I've
No
been
problem.
doing pretty much all year since COVID started. I figured if I can't play music, I could at least talk about it.
Yeah, okay.
You know,
That's cool.
I'm actually getting back to playing. I actually have a gig coming up in about 2 weeks at a friend's church, and we're just doing covers, a lot of classic rock and a lot of yacht rock. That
Right. So
Steely Dan meets Little
is
River
it like
Band.
socially distanced and all that kind of thing?
Oh, absolutely. It's called Rock on the Grass, which implies it's outside on the
Right.
lawn.
Okay.
So but yeah, believe me, I wouldn't be doing it unless it was safe.
No,
I've been
no.
very leery. I've had some friends that have been playing out probably more often than I think they should. And
Yeah.
so far, everybody's been safe, but I don't know. It's a little dicey. So I'm going to, you know,
That's
take,
yeah, it's
be
tough, isn't
very,
it?
be very particular about the gigs I take, but I'm
Yeah.
really excited to get back and do something. So
Yeah, I think we all are, but at the moment it's all everything's on hold, so we just have to see how it works out.
I know it. Well, I don't know. I'm feeling better now than I was 6 months ago. So hopefully
Yeah,
we're getting
me too.
closer to finding a way to make everything work safely. Well, cool. So tell me, how have you been spending your days lately during this unusual time?
Well, I've been working on a few bits and pieces, few projects. We've been exchanging a few files on a new Yes album, so that's been pretty exciting. Uh, Although we've not been, in the same room, so it's been a lot of exchanging ideas online and stuff. And I've done another album with Chris Braid as well, and that's pretty well finished now. So little projects here and there, really. People ask me to play on a couple of tunes and send me the files, and I get stuck in with it. So that's the sort of musical side of it.
Yeah,
Uh, Keeping my computers up to speed, which is quite tricky. Getting all the latest software that I can. Um, just making as many decent noises as I can come across, really.
oh yeah. Well, I'm sure there's plenty of those. So I understand you guys just wrapped up the rock and roll fantasy camp. Is that
That's right.
right?
Steve, Alan, and myself, we did just a little sort of online fantasy camp thing, which is pretty good. I think that uh, in some ways it's kind of better because you've got that direct connection with each person rather than somebody chipping in asking too many questions. You get it's nicely spread out amongst the people that were on the line there.
Sure. And I would take it that was mostly Yes fans.
Pretty much so, yeah. I think that I knew most of the people anyway, so it was pretty straightforward, really. But yeah, I went through a couple of tunes that I created for like Machine Messiah. I showed them all the various elements of that I put together. I gave them a few tricks that I used along the way that might help them, you know, make their own music and make some good stuff.
Well, I heard some good stuff about it. We've got some mutual friends that went to it. I know our good buddy Joey was one of
Yeah,
them. Yeah, with
yeah. Joey the drummer.
Yeah, yeah, with
Yeah,
the
yeah, he's crazy. He's a good
yeah,
dude.
he's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, and he has a really good tribute out of New York. I think you guys have
Yes,
seen him
Total
before.
Mass Retain. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're really good.
I hear they're working up the Remembering side two of Tales, so
Okay, that'd be interesting.
somebody's going to play it, you know.
Yeah,
It's going
but
to get
yeah,
cool.
Jerry's on the cruise to the edge, which we unfortunately we couldn't do this year, and it's been put off to the year after next. But they usually have that, the house band or the prog rock jam, and they tackle some of the more complex jazz stuff. I mean, it's all pretty complex, but that they they had a go at Gates of Delirium a couple of years ago, which was quite interesting. But
Wow, yeah. And you guys were getting ready to do Relayer, is that right? Before
that's
everything
right.
got put
Yeah.
on hold?
Well, we scheduled to start this year in the spring in Europe, but situations changed, and that's been put back till next spring. So hopefully, there'll be some kind of an easing up of the restrictions, so we can all get about and get back to doing what we love doing.
Oh yeah. Well, I know we were all really anxious to see Relayer. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
I've been talking about it for years. Like, what
and
could they do next? You know, and it's like,
it's a
okay,
phenomenal album. I mean,
it
it's
really is.
just the studying Patrick Morris's parts on there alone is is quite incredible. There's so many things going on at any given time, and it's extremely complex. I don't know whether they had fun making it or whether it was just a kind of challenge that they had to get through it. But when you analyze it, it's a pretty amazing album.
It really is, and it's unlike any other album in the catalog, I think, and I think Patrick has a lot to do with that. I think had Rick stuck around, it probably would have sounded more of Tales, but
Yeah,
in Patrick's hands, became almost this jazz fusion thing. And if I'm not mistaken, the guys were kind of inspired by Mahavishnu and a bunch of 70s
I think
fusion
you're
at the
right.
time anyways. Is that right, you think?
Yeah, I think that because that mid 70 period was when it was all happening. All the people like Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock, and from a keyboard player standpoint, that was all breaking through at that point, and it was kind of, I suppose, it was crossing over into progressive rock at that time. So there was I remember when I was a student at university, I'd go and see, you know, Steely Dan one week and Chick Corea the next, and uh, Yes the next, or whatever. It was they were all kind of cross fertilized in a funny kind of way. So it was a very interesting period for music, I think. Right bang in the middle of the 70s
Oh, yeah.
when the lines were quite blurred between progressive rock and jazz rock.
Oh yeah, and I think at the end of the day, progressive fans really like both, because they both have a sense of adventure and they have the chops and
Yeah,
the
that's right.
amazing arrangements. So it scratches a similar itch, I think. So, and I
Well,
even
yeah,
heard stories. I may be wrong, but I think Yes even did some double bills with Mahavishnu.
I think they
Maybe.
might have done. Yeah, at some point. Yeah,
Well, I've heard a funny story. You've probably heard the story about how when they went to see King Crimson, the first King Crimson, John's like,
yeah,
Chris, we've got to practice more, you know. And then they saw Maha Vishnu. They're like, Chris, we got to practice even more,
yeah,
you know.
yeah. I saw that. I saw Mahavishnu around the same time actually, because as you say, there were bands like Brand X was starting to be around at that time. Again, it was very much a kind of crossing of the waves between progressive English music and the influence of American jazz rock. So it was quite a fascinating time. I mean, when I was at music college, I was studying people like Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock and Danny Clark and all of that stuff. Uh, and Billy Carbon, all of that era. And I think that, at the same time, I was listening to Yes and ELP and King Crimson. So, it was very, I think it was a very open musical time. People weren't blinkered so much then
Yeah,
in terms of
absolutely.
what they
And out of it
appreciated.
came some amazing music that we're still talking about all these years later. I mean, there's been
Yeah,
so many other decades of progressive rock that have come since then. But the 70s stuff just is the cornerstone, and the stuff that I think every generation falls in love with.
I think
But
so.
it's really
Yeah.
kind of timeless. What was the first time you saw Yes? What year was that, would you say?
I think it was probably about 1970. It was just after Wakeman had joined, so
Okay, so
uh,
like the
he'd been
Fragile era,
there.
basically.
Yeah, I think it was a Fragile. I saw them in Manchester because that's where I grew up, and there was a classical music hall there called the Free Trade Hall, where the Halley Orchestra, who were basically the Northern Orchestra, they used to play there, and Wakeman was really showing off, and I remember it was quite an experience, thinking, wow, this band's got some legs, and they're all quite, apart from John Anderson, they're all quite imposing big guys, Chris Squire's about 6'4", Wakeman's about 6'4", so they were kind of imposing to look at as much as the music that came at you.
And they were one of the first ones to like mic the entire band up, aren't they? I've heard stories about them buying Iron Butterflies PA and like miking the entire drum kit up, and that was kind of something new at the time, I think. Yeah, just having a
Yeah, I think they were new. I mean, the lighting show was very radical as well because uh, I think Michael Tate, who has Tate Townsend, does all the huge shows now out of Lidditz, Pennsylvania. He was their lighting guy, and he was experimenting with all kinds of things to try and enhance their visuals as much as uh, how great the music was. And he'd actually designed the round stage for them, which was a very very radical design for a rock band to be, sort of turning around in the round, and you
yeah
know the
for the
the whole vision of Yes was very very impressive.
oh, I can imagine. I wish I could have seen them back then, but little
Yeah,
too
it
young,
was.
a little too young. Um, but the in the round, am I right that a little bit of the drama tour was in the round also, or was
Yeah,
that? I thought so.
the American leg was in the round, the US leg, yeah.
I thought so.
And that was my first tour, so that was pretty scary.
Oh, I can imagine. Pretty exhilarating too, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, when you think that you'd be in an arena, because a lot of them were the ice hockey arenas, so they held about, like Madison Square Garden, they held about 17, 18,000. But of course, when because they had it in the middle of the ice, or the covering on the ice, and in the middle of that, they put all more chairs in there. So it was just like a wall of faces, and it was scary. Yeah, I mean, I remember the first gig I did was at in Toronto at the then Maple Leaf Gardens, and it was just wow. This is what I want to do. That was
Oh,
brilliant.
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
What was it like to have a number one hit and then suddenly it's like, hold it, you're going to go to Yes. We're going to join Yes. Did it feel like you were kind of surfing a wave of popularity and then had to kind of stop and go do something else? Or was there any?
Well, I think it was a combination of factors. I think that at that time, Yes was just a three-piece because they'd had these slightly disastrous sessions in Paris with Roy Thomas Baker and
Yeah, I've heard.
John Anderson and Rick had actually gone off to do other things, and so they were a three-piece being managed by the same management company that we had, so that Trevor and I had. And so we bumped into them in the office, and it was a case of, you know, I think Chris said to us, "You guys got any songs? We're looking for songs." And so we sat down and we started writing a couple of things that we thought might be suitable. And then we got into a rehearsal room with the guys. And the next thing you know, we're kind of, Trevor's singing and I'm playing keyboards, and we just kind of morphed into them in a way. It was not like a kind of, we'd like you guys to join the band. It was more of kind of a natural progression, and then we decided, well, we'll stop being pop stars and try being rock stars.
Yeah, playing in one of your favorite bands ever. I can imagine. It'd be hard to say no
Amazing,
to
yeah,
that.
And Trevor was a big fan as well. So we both had that inherent sort of yes music in us, I think, and particularly I think Trevor being a bass player was very very close with Chris because of uh, Chris being such a pioneer of the instrument.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
I think Trevor was mighty impressed by that.
Question. We've seen a lot of the lip sync footage of Tempest Fugit and Into the Lens. Have you ever seen any actual live footage from that tour?
Only very, very much different, distant camera. Probably just something that's one of the fans smuggled in and did a bit of a shot. I don't think there's anything significant or nothing commercially designed that actually came out of that.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame that it just kind of slipped by because it's such a unique tour. It would have
Yeah,
been nice to see it documented officially, but I know
it
how it is.
would.
I think they had just done the previous tour and filmed some of that. So I
Yeah,
think sometimes the thought is, well, we just did that. Why do it again? But the lineup and everything was so different. It would have been wonderful to get a really good glimpse at what it was like. But we have the live versions, we can listen to, so we kind of know. But it'd be
yeah.
interesting to see the staging and such.
It would have been. I think that, but we're much more savvy now, aren't we? Everything's filmed. Everything's filmed from about
Oh, you
a
guys were
hundred
you,
angles.
you guys were on quite a roll. I was collecting them all, but then I think it became kind of cost prohibitive to keep doing the actual video of
Yeah,
the shows. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, making videos then, when it was, the beginning of the '80s, was a very expensive game, and particularly when MTV started, and people were making commercial videos, they were costing fortunes, hundreds of thousands of dollars, just to make one thing. Because I think the record label realised how significant MTV was when it came out in 1981. That they could break their artists on there very easily rather than having to go to radio.
Sure. And you were the first guy to play a chord or arpeggio on MTV.
A little spread, I call it. Yeah,
There you go. Yeah, yeah, that's pretty
the
neat,
opening the opening bars of Video Killer Radio Star. Yeah, and my hands are there playing that little opening spread. So.
Do you feel like that was a prophetic thing? Did video really kill the radio star, you think?
Uh, it was in some respects, I think, in hindsight, but I think it's more to do with the fact that it was about how technology changes people's perception of the arts, and I think that that goes back to the silent films when the movie stars in the silent films suddenly had to talk in the movies, and the voices didn't match up to the characters that they were seeing as the in the silent films. So it kind of the whole generation of technology changed the cycle of how people were. I think, and I think the same with the radio. I think when television first started coming out, I think a lot of the old radio announcers didn't really, when people saw the face and it couldn't equate to that person. And that's really what it's about. It's about, I mean, obviously things like some things were prophetic, like, computers writing music and, rewriting symphonies and things like that, which, has happened in a lot of ways. People sit there and rattle away on a computer and it does the rest for you. So, certain things I think were pretty prophetic in there.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, although I don't think it totally killed the radio star per se. I mean,
No,
radio is still kicking in one way or another. And
radio's radio's still got a very important part to play, I think.
oh, I agree. It's not like you have to always have this visual stimulus. Sometimes it's just better to let your
Yeah.
imagination do that.
I mean, as far as music's concerned, I think it is very, it's become very stylized. I mean, it's very hard to get progressive music being played on a radio station. That's for sure.
Oh, sure.
Uh, um, and so, yeah, it's become a bit stylized, I think. And whenever we get played, whether it be Asia or the Buggles or Yes or whatever, it's always on a classic station rather than the latest station. Whereas I remember with Asia when we were we first came out, we were on every single rock station, and what they had, the AM stations then, which was the early pre-FM stations.
Hmm.
So that was yeah. I mean, I think it was a bit more open then for the people like me, but I was a lot younger then.
I've always thought, and I wonder if maybe you see a similar line of thinking, that the greatest follow-up to Drama was the first Asia album.
Right, that's an
If,
interesting concept.
well, I just think the way that you and Steve play together very much carried over to that record.
I
And
think that was an important ingredient because I think that I've always had ever since started working with Steve on the Drama album, I think we've had a kind of inert understanding of the. He's much more of a virtuoso instrumentalist than I am. So I tended to work more with him as in a supporting role, I suppose, in many ways. So I gave him the soundscapes and the things that he could basically fly over. And that's sort of carried on, I think, pretty much throughout that we've been working together for the 40 years.
well, I agree. And I think that, yeah, just there's this simpatico thing between the two of you that just blends so nicely. And I think you inspire some of his best playing. I mean, if you just compare Tormato to Drama, it's like all the noodling is gone and it's down to
Yeah,
just concise parts that really serve the song well. And there's still amazing playing in them, but it seemed like, Wakeman was more of a sparring partner and you
yeah.
supported him better.
I think that's a fair appraisal. I mean, having said that, I think that if you go further back and you look at, say, Close to the Edge, you know, you can see Wakeman does quite a lot more supporting role underneath the
Oh,
rest of
very
the
true.
arrangement.
Yeah.
And so I think that as time went by, he became more virtuosic, if you like, or more, you know, outrageously soloing and that kind of thing, rather than playing that kind of role. If you listen to some of those organ parts on Close to the Edge, he's not really doing a great deal, but he's just kind of holding the harmonic texture there. And I think when you got to I think it was apparent ongoing for the one to some degree is that there was a lot of like you say, sparring partner. Steve would be going away and Wakeman would be off doing something else, and that the two things were at times conflicting, but sometimes it was magical. But uh, and I think maybe Tormato was even an extension of that. So when I got involved with the drama album with Steve, I think that he was kind of happy to have a keyboard player that was not sort of trying to tangle with him all the time and was actually trying to support him.
Sure. Instead of like, I'll match you note for note. It was more like, let's just make music together here. Um, I'm curious, did it feel like they were onto a new direction when you hooked up with the trio? Like, because of what I understand is like Rick and John were writing songs that could have easily been on Tomato number two.
Yeah,
Meanwhile, meanwhile, John, Chris, and Alan, or Steve, Chris, and Alan
yeah.
had written some music that was a little more riffy, a little more concise, a little more punchy. At least in hindsight, it seems like it was. I was wondering, did it feel like a new Yes was dawning when you hooked up and heard these songs that they were working on for Drama?
I tell you, when we first got involved with them, I couldn't believe how dynamic the rhythm section was because I think that maybe maybe they'd been held back a little bit on the Tomato album, so they weren't that sort of sort of manic bass and drum parts that with great long bass riffs and all that kind of thing. I think that they really they really came together then, and I think that they wanted to break boundaries, and I think that, certainly from my um, experience of it, Steve was really flying away as well. So they were like a sort of unharnessed monster, that were ready to break out and do something different.
Yeah, well, I think you were the perfect guys to make it happen. I'm not so
Thank you.
sure that that record would have turned out the same had Rick and John stuck around. I'm sure it wouldn't have.
No.
It would have been totally different. Because I've heard the Paris stuff, and it's okay, but it just kind of reminds me of more Tormato, but not quite as inspired.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain elements that I think they carried on over from those sessions, but they were not really that well crafted, and uh, I think they'd sort of had enough of each other's company at that time.
Well, it happens. I mean, it's been
Yeah,
going on 10 years, and that's a long time to hang around with anybody.
yeah,
So, well, the thing about Yes that's always been exciting is every time new blood comes into the fold, they're more immediate to the sound, and out of it comes some really interesting new music.
yeah. Well, it's like I suppose when Trevor Rabin came in,
Oh,
it
absolutely.
added added another dimension then, and I think if you look at Yes's music over 50 years,
When you
the
first heard
import.
9125, did you know the backstory about how, there was no Yes, and then they tried to start a band called Cinema, and then it became Yes
Well, yeah, I remember they actually had one course before that was XYZ, which was with
with the Jimmy
Jimmy
Page? Yeah.
Page, and that was around the same time that we were putting Asia together. So I think Chris and Alan were thinking of hooking up with Jimmy Page, and I was with Steve really. So we kind of kept in touch, and then when Steve started working with John Wetton, uh, he called me in and said, we've got this thing going here. Do you want to get involved?
Um,
So,
so when you finally heard like Owner, did you, it's a typical kind of power chord based kind of riff, which isn't a far cry from say Heat of the Moment or something like that. Did you feel like maybe they had kind of looked at what Asia was doing and went in that direction, or do you think it was just kind of what would have happened anyway in the early 80s?
I think they suddenly thought that if we could do it, then they could do something similar. I'm not saying they copied us because
No.
uh, it was a different era, but I think that they wanted commercial success as well, and I think when they saw what we did with Asia, it probably pushed them in that direction to think, well, they've had hit singles on the radio, they've got videos on MTV, we'd like a bit of that. So
Sure.
it probably had some influence on it, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it happened. I think the 80s were better with Yes as a big
Yeah.
part of them. So it's all's well that ends well. Were you pretty familiar with the whole catalog by the time you joined? Did you have all the albums and
Mainly the early ones, actually. I mean, my first experience of Yes was Time the Word album,
mhm.
and uh, and I really thought that was pretty special, a special album.
Oh, I
And
still
so,
do. I think
yeah,
there's some.
it's radical stuff like the Big Country theme coming in, and no one had really done anything like that before. So that to me was the real starting point with Yes. And then, of course, I got further on into Close to the Edge and Fragile and the Yes album, of course. Uh, so I was really in that period. I think after Close to the Edge, I kind of drifted off, and maybe I was getting into more of the jazz rock stuff,
Mhm.
and so I kind of moved away from Yes at that point. So even the Relay album, I was not really that familiar with, nor uh, Going for the One or Tomato. So those three albums, I was moving into other areas. I think at that point. So when we came round to actually reviewing the old albums and going out into the album series, it was a bit of an eye opener because I was not totally familiar with all of that stuff.
Yeah, I was gonna. That's kind of what I was getting at. Is Are there any tunes that you really have grown to love now that you've explored those albums?
Yeah, I mean, I think Gates of Delirium is a fantastic piece.
Oh
You know, I
yeah.
didn't realize what an amazing piece that was. I think that parts of Going for the One, Turn of the Century, Awaken, of course, some amazing pieces were put together on that album particularly. But yeah, I mean, I enjoy playing it all. It's all got merit, and even going back to the Tony K stuff, Tony was a fundamental part of the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. And what an amazing organ sound. I just
Hmm.
think he had such an edge to it.
That's it. It was really, really dirty and gravelly. It was great.
Very much. I think Rick's organ sounds were a little more conservative in comparison.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
I
He
just
didn't go for the overdriven Leslie, and I think that's something that when I got involved with Yes on the Drama album, Chris was very much says, wind up that Leslie, let's hear it growl, because uh, I think he wanted to go back more to that sort of Tony K uh, Hammond sound, that was really very much just a part of that
I
era.
can think of some examples, and people have said that that album is a bit of a throwback to like the Yes album, and
Yeah,
in that sense, I can see it.
yeah,
And even like these big chords kind of held, like yesterday a morning came a smile
yeah,
upon it, or cables that carry the light to
yeah,
the cities we build,
yeah,
same kind of
yeah.
thing. Big,
And then the big chord, the big suspended chord with lots of dirt on it.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
and there is I think there's a parallel between that because uh, it's funny you should say that, but that always reminds me of that section on the S album is that great big fat suspended chord with lots of dirt on it, it's just sustained underneath.
Exactly.
Uh, that's such a great element of Yes. I don't think Wakeman really did much of that, to be honest. I don't think there's that kind of you know that dirty, earthy sort of Hammond sound. And,
I don't
and I
think
think
so.
that's the reason that particularly Chris was very happy that I was adhering to that idea.
Willing to go back to that. Well, yeah, I think that's just one of the many things that makes that album so special. I've talked with a lot of other keyboardists, and young guys like me look back fondly on things like the Mellotron because
Yeah,
I never had to deal with one in person.
yeah.
So there's
You
a
wouldn't have
certain
to carry one
romance.
around.
Exactly. And you got
Yeah.
to admit, the sound is amazing. It's
Oh yeah.
timeless. So there's a reason that it's loved so much. But I noticed a lot of keyboard players, like Rick's a good example, where it's like every few years he'd kind of redo his rig and put in all this modern stuff.
Mm.
And I was wondering, is it just, it's like, was it just exciting to have brand new boards coming along that somehow worked better or easier or, the urge to upgrade? I'm just curious your thoughts on that. And if it's like a
I
never
think
ending
it's
thing for keyboard players or just depends on
yeah.
the
I
person.
think it's I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, really, because whilst you've got much easier technology to have at hand, the you can't ever really beat the sound of those early instruments. Certainly the mellotron and the Hammond organ.
Sure.
It's required a totally different kind of technique. All these keyboards, the Mini Moog had a different technique. All of those early keyboards that we used in progressive music had their own specific technique, and you only had you know the mellotron would only hold for 8 seconds or whatever, and the keyboard was like sponge, sloppy. So it required a whole different approach. So I think when it's all very well you've got all these magical keyboards now, which I use live as well, which simulate samples of mellotrons and all the rest of it. Uh, I still think that maybe doesn't quite grab the way that those instruments were played in the early days. Like a Fender Rhodes or something like that had its own technique.
Yeah.
Clavinet, all of those things that people used had different techniques.
Yeah, very much. Did you use Rhodes much? It seems like Rhodes is not really used a whole lot in the progressive rock genre. I mean, it's all over fusion, but Pat
Yeah,
Mraz on Sound Chaser is one of the few examples I can even think of Rhodes on a Yes record.
well, yeah, there's that great big sort of arpeggio part in the beginning of Sound Chaser.
Yeah.
Uh, but I used it on drama in a few times.
Yeah, I was thinking there by the
Yeah,
waterside,
yeah,
under that kind
uh,
of bit.
yeah. That bit's very rosy. Uh, yeah, I think Wakeman was more. He was more on the RMI piano, which is more of a kind of brittle sound and uh, almost like a kind of very reedy sort of sound. So it
Yeah,
didn't have that sort of that sort of warm, sort of hazy, bubbly kind of sound that the Rhodes had.
yeah,
So he was much more RMI pianos. I think that Patrick did use Rhodes in quite a few places. Uh, I think in the 11/8 section in Gates, he used one of the sustained section there towards the end. Um, but yeah, it's not widely common, not widely common in there. But I think I used Rhodes quite a bit because I think maybe that was the influence of the jazz rock thing
yeah,
taking a bit of a hold of me and
yeah.
to be putting that in there.
Well, I love that sound. It's great. Do you think, am I right that it was really hard to get a real piano sound on stage until like the late 80s when Yamaha came out with that one that kind of looked like a little grand piano? I forget the number. I mean, it seems like a lot of people use Rhodes in lieu of a piano. Like I would use a piano here if only I could get a decent piano sound on stage, but since I won't, I'll just use the RMI or I'll use the Rhodes or whatever.
Yeah, well, I used to use the Yamaha CP70 and
That's the one.
CP80.
Yes.
Yeah,
It
but that
seemed
was
like,
around the sort of late 70s, early 80s.
did that seem like a bit of a revelation when that one came out?
It was about as good as it got because obviously the concept of dragging a real piano around was not really an option.
Right.
And this thing folded up into two halves so you could put it in a flight case.
A very
Um,
heavy flight case.
yeah, and the thing was, it was a bit of a bugger to tune as well because the strings were very, very. It wasn't like multi-strung. It was just one string per note. So
Oh, okay.
the bass strings themselves were very, very. They were quite short. So in order to get that depth of sound out was quite difficult. But it did the job. I think more so than trying to do it on a Rhodes or an RMI or anything like that. Which in fact they sounded very much like an electric piano. It's had the kind of it had the subliminal feel of being like an acoustic piano, although it wasn't
Yeah.
technically.
Well, it seems like it was just everywhere around 1978, 79. It's like you watch all this
Yeah,
live footage and everybody's got one, you know.
yeah, that's right.
And it features on a lot of albums too. I could think like Duke from Genesis, it's all over that album. So it popped up a lot on recordings too.
Yeah, yeah. I used it on the Asia album as well. I think on Wildest Dreams. I think the eighth part on the first verse is on a CP70.
Yeah, that's another classic sound, definitely.
And the other thing was it had a an auto panner on it, so it would kind of rotate around the stereo.
Did you
So
run your boards in stereo like in these big arenas?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I used to get a lot of grief from people because Roy Clare, who had Player Brothers, a
Hmm.
big PA system, he told me he said, "Why are you running all your stuff in stereo?" He said, "Well," he said, "Look, those kids can't hear stereo out there." And I said, "Well, actually, they can." I said, "You tell that to the people that go and watch Pink Floyd, when they've got all this stuff bouncing around the arena,
Sure.
things like
Yeah.
that." He seemed to think that the kids didn't like stereo, but I overruled him. So I used to run all my stuff in stereo. That was a stereo instrument. I mean, obviously things like the MIDI Moogs were only monophonic, uh, as were quite a lot of keyboards at that time. The Selena String Ensemble, which was one of my favourite toys was only mono. So it was generally speaking around about that time. Most of the things were mono anyway.
And do you kind of do your own mixing on the fly up there, or is it all left to the sound man to get all your different boards blended together?
No, we go through it in great detail, in the preparation, the pre-production, and he tells me to trim this level, trim that level. Can we just have a little bit more of that there? So we go through it in really quite a lot of detail, and then I don't touch anything because we've got everything preset at a level, and you know, it doesn't nothing really pops out unnecessarily.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh,
A- And going back to the drama album, do you remember what songs they had already kind of written and arranged when you guys hooked up with them?
they had some of the riffs in Machine Messiah, but they didn't have a song aspect of it. They had, you know, all that
Right,
stuff.
the riff.
Yeah, the riff. Yeah, they had that stuff. They had, the riff in Tempest Future.
Yeah.
All that stuff. Uh, but I think when we came in, we started bringing the song elements into those riffs, and that's how for instance, we had "I'm a Camera," which with the Buggles, which became into the Lens. So that our ideas kind of got yesified.
Yeah, it's almost easier to see how it evolved in that direction because we can go back and listen to the Buggles versus this, but the other way around, it's kind of a mystery. So it's interesting to hear
yeah.
what you all
So
brought to the ones they were working on.
we took the risks, and then we sort of implanted ideas into them, and then they got developed, and we,
Are
we,
you
we didn't
are you
rehearse that much on.
are you familiar with a song on Big Generator called "I'm Running"?
Yeah,
I have heard demos from the drama era where that bass line is played. Do you remember it
yeah.
popping up during the drama days and just not getting used because it was maybe
I
just
don't remember that, no, but it does have a familiar twist to it. That's for
yeah,
sure.
do that and do that, boom, ba, 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 da. It's got that South American kind of
Yeah,
vibe to it.
yeah.
Maybe which probably wouldn't have fit on drama anyway.
No,
I've heard stories about him, Chris, just playing it over and over, and Trevor finally going, "Okay, Chris, we'll write a song around it." And
yeah.
like you're driving me crazy with this thing. Okay,
Well,
we'll
the
use
thing
it.
was, Chris used to get very attached to these ideas and to these riffs, and they probably did stick around for years, because he's he'd get very attached to these riffs and these ideas. So it doesn't surprise me that it was something that was probably hanging about there before he got in. They made the track for the Big Generator.
Yeah, it. Only had to wait 7 years. I think there's other riffs in the catalog that waited decades to get used.
Yeah.
So
Well, Fly from Here took about 40 years to come out. 35 years to come out.
yeah. Yeah, that whole sidelong suite, I have to say, I think that's one of the best things that Yes has done, in contemporary times. And am I right that the majority of it was already written a long time ago?
Yeah.
And was there anything that was written freshly to add to it when the album was made?
I think Steve's section, the bumpy ride, that was pretty new. Uh,
Okay.
so a lot of people have different opinions about that. Some people like it. Some people find it a sort of gratuitous side note. But
I don't mind it. It
uh,
reminds me of something that could have been on Tormato,
yeah,
personally. It has that Tormato-y kind of happy kind of vibe
yes, it
going on
does.
there,
Yeah,
so, but that's not a bad thing. When I heard the album the first time, I thought, well, this is like a little blend of drama and Tormato and a lot of fresh new stuff too,
yeah,
and kind of a late 70s, early 80s kind of Yes album, but updated.
yeah. I mean, to be honest, most of it had been hanging around, something that Trevor and I'd had for quite some years. So
Yeah.
I think that when they got Trevor in to produce the album at the very beginning of the Fly From Here sessions, Fly From Here was really the main piece they wanted to do, and I think that's why they, or certainly Trevor was in. I think he was fairly institutional in getting me back in the band, to be honest, um, because I think he felt that we were doing that material. I would be the best person to be in there doing it.
I'd have to
Uh,
agree. I mean, you're the guy that helped write it, so it just
yeah,
makes sense to have you play it.
and then it stretched out onto the other stuff, and I think that's when the guys turned around and said, uh, "Well, as you've written most, you might as well rejoin the band."
Yeah.
So that's how it all came about, and I'm going back now almost 10 years, which is February 2011.
Yeah.
That's when they invited me back in. I've
Yeah.
been there
So,
ever since.
yeah. 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 And you've got the longest tenure of any Yes keyboardist at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
Did you ever
that's
think
something.
you would be back in Yes?
Um, I'd had a few when I was in the States. I was working in the States for a couple of years in California, and Chris would call me up sometimes and say, "You should come back in Yes," But it never really happened. There was an abortive thing where they were going to do a tour called More Drama, which is going back to around about 2005, something like that. 2000, maybe a bit earlier actually. And yeah, I mean, Chris was often saying, you should come back into Yes, but I don't think that at that time, John Anderson was still there. Uh, I think he wanted Rick Wakeman in. There was a kind of a thing where John Anderson and Rick Wakeman were very, very tight. In terms of
Oh yeah.
they saw themselves as if he wasn't in Yes, I wasn't going to be in Yes. Uh, so yeah, I think that I literally just kind of felt maybe that one day it would happen. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, indeed it did. And you know, there's been a little bit of discussion about the return trip, and I was curious your thoughts on it. Some people are like, "Oh, they're erasing Benoit David from Yes history," and it's like, I don't see it that way. I mean, you can always go listen to that version if you want to. So I'm just
Yeah,
curious your
I don't
thoughts
think it
on.
was. I don't think it was ever a case of steamrolling Benoit out of the album. I think it was something. Trevor felt very close to the material and the songs, and I think it was very much, him running with the ball in that respect that he wanted a chance to be able to do those songs himself, and that's really why the return trip came about. And I think that it was a kind of a bit of a mission for him because he wanted to maybe he felt he wanted to prove himself or whatever. I don't know what the full reasons were, but I certainly collaborated on it with him in quite a few areas, and I think he was happy in the role. I don't think it was anyone's uh, notion to make well, Benoit wasn't good enough on it or anything like that. I think that it was just an alternative version that was
Oh
put
yeah.
forward.
Well, I think so too. And honestly, I mean, even when it came out with Benoit, it's like, this is almost a drama reunion. Was there ever
Yeah,
any talk to just have Trevor sing them back then? Or was it like, we've got this new guy and he's going to tour, and obviously Trevor's not going to tour, so don't even go there.
yeah. No, I think that Benoit was, he he was there on the beginning of that era of Yes, when him and Oliver were there. So he was very much, you know, they're always very loyal people. I mean, people have always said this stuff about, oh God, they boot him out, they kick him out. Yes, it's like this revolving door. Um, my experience is that all the members have always been very loyal, and I think that Chris particularly was Mr. Loyal, and I think that the fact that he brought Benoit in the first place, he was very keen that he should continue, and so. As I say, Trevor was more in the role of producer anyway, so I don't think that he would have been right at that time to go out and try and front Yes, to be honest.
Sure. Oh yeah. Well, it's still, I find the whole turn of events rather fascinating, because,
Yeah, so
hearing
do
the album with Benoit, I was like, well, since Trevor, it's almost like, it almost sounded like there was a demo that Trevor sang on and Benoit was doing his best to recreate it because he really reminded me of Trevor when it came to phrasing and all that
Yeah,
kind of stuff. So
I
it's almost
think
like,
Trevor pushed him quite hard in that area because Trevor had such a um, single-minded concept of how it should be presented that he did push Benoit in quite a few areas. Maybe Benoit was a little bit uncomfortable in some areas, I don't know, but certainly I think he wanted to establish the vocal aspect the way that he kind of saw it in
yeah.
many ways.
Well, I think it turned out great, and I think Benoit did a great job at the
I think
time.
he did, yeah,
But it
yeah,
was also interesting to hear Trevor, it's like even listening with Benoit, it's like, well, what if Trevor had sung? And finally we got to hear that. And it was
yeah,
interesting because I don't think any of us had heard Trevor sing, since the Drama album, unless you tune into some YouTube clips and catch some of the things he's done live.
yeah,
So it was really interesting to hear him sing all those songs.
absolutely.
Yeah. And would you say it was a bit of an homage to Chris as well? Because it seems like the bass is really cranked up on that new version.
Yeah, I think he felt that it was, something that Chris would have liked, Uh, uh, as I said before, Trevor was very much not in awe of Chris, but very respectful of his ability as a bass player and a vocalist. And Trevor had learned a lot off him. I think when they're doing particularly the 90125 album, uh, Trevor Trevor learned a lot from Chris, and so I think there was that underlying deep respect that Trevor had. So when Chris died, I think that Trevor thought maybe this was a nice way to pay homage to him.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. I think both versions are worthy and nice to have in the collection.
Yeah,
And great batch of songs too. I think it's a very strong modern Yes album. Um, so I have a few fan questions here that were sent to me.
yeah.
Um, a gentleman named Arnhem wrote in and said, "You're going to talk to my keyboard hero, Geoff Downes. For me, the Light program is the best keyboard album ever.
Well,
Maybe you can ask him if he's going to do another new dance orchestra album. And what about his Pulse project, which has been in the pipeline for a long time?"
well, that's interesting. The Pulse project really was something that um, I was doing with Rob Aubrey, who's produces a lot of prog rock stuff over here, and Mike Holmes from IQ, and Nick DiVigilio, who works a lot with Rob Aubrey on various projects,
Hmm.
and so it was just a kind of off the shelf kind of thing we were doing. Never really did that much. I think we had a couple of tracks, um, but it never really sort of got the legs for whatever reason. So I mean, maybe one day, a couple of the ideas will come out, but I think they kind of never really got developed.
Okay. And the
So
new dance orchestra?
yeah, I mean, I'm always open to do another one. I think that was really, I think, more to do with me using all the keyboards I had in my collection. It was more of a kind of a sort of labour of love, I think, that I wanted to use all of these different keyboard sounds to create this imaginary orchestra. So, and I think that that's one of the things that I've always been really is an orchestral player. I think
Absolutely.
uh, that's my that's my style really.
Absolutely. And it gets a little tiring, you always get the Rick Wakeman comparison because of, just filling his spot sometimes.
Yeah,
But you are a pioneer in your own way. I mean, man, you're an 80s keyboard pioneer par excellence as far as I'm concerned. So,
thank you.
I
Yeah,
get a little
well,
tired of it's like, don't compare Jeff, don't compare them because they're two different people and,
I think the thing was, Sean, I revered those people. From Tony Kaye to uh, Keith Emerson and Wakeman. Those are the guys that really inspired me to do something as a keyboard player. I think that I was not trying to emulate them. I mean, someone like Keith Emerson's technique was off the scale. I mean, there's very few players that could even match him today. And I think that when you put all those guys together, the thing that I really grabbed me was the fact that I could take those instruments and turn them into, you know, not just me playing a fast line or something like that, but create these huge textures and the layers of sounds that would create this whole different type of keyboard picture, if you like. So that was really what my thing was. That's what I really tried to do, is to because that excited me, to actually be able to create those textures and those layers that hadn't been around before. I think that you know I was probably one of the first guys doing that and creating those textures.
do you think, do you ever look back on some keyboard sounds and think, wow, that didn't age very well in hindsight?
Yeah, I think there's a whole period of when the workstation keyboards came out, and I think I think that both Keith and Rick were guilty in some ways of when when you discarded the things that you did really well, like playing the Hammond organ or the acoustic piano, and then you had these workstations that had all these sort of, FM kind of sounds and tinkles and things like the D550s
The
and
the pan
and
flutes and all those kind of
yeah,
breathy
all those kind
sounds
of
and
things.
stuff.
Yeah, and they all became very much. People used to say, well, you heard it on every single record in the 80s. You'd hear a D550 or a D50. It'd be the same sort of jingly bell kind of sound for the intro or the Yamaha DX7 or whatever. It'd have the same sound on every record you heard. And I think what it did was when I think that Keith and Rick started using that stuff, I don't think it really worked with that style of playing. And I remember,
I agree.
I'm
Yeah.
not being critical in any way,
No, I
but
mean it was just the sign of the times, I think. But
I remember seeing Rick playing an M1, Korg M1, and it just didn't have the right feel to it because he'd not grown up with that era. I mean, I kind of grew up with that, the digital keyboards coming in. I had the Fairlight and all that sort of stuff,
sure.
and so I had kind of, I suppose, the benefit of knowledge that I'd already started to move with the new technology of keyboards, which were there at the beginning of the 80s,
Oh
and I
yeah.
think that in many ways was very helpful to me. That I tried not to go too cheesy on some of those sounds. I mean, they're cheesy, those sounds.
That's kind of the key word. And in hindsight, I listened to things like the live ABWH album, and it just, between the electric drums and the Korgs,
Yeah,
it seems so 1989. You
it
know.
does, and I think that and this is no critical thing because
No, I mean, I still really like that album, but I just
yeah,
wondered what it would have been like if there'd been a little Hammond on it and some real Moog, and there probably is a
well,
little,
that's it.
little real
I
Moog
mean,
on it.
people may say that about I try and be as careful as possible now that I try not to be I try not to be too cheesy. It's easy to be cheesy, but I think the thing was that I remember seeing uh, Igor, who was an amazing player, had incredible technique.
Yeah.
But the sounds he was using were not really getting across. There were sort of these sharp, chunky digital sounds that not really suited to Yes's music. If you're trying to recreate the older stuff, particularly, um, you've got to know, those mellotrons have got to sound quite authentic.
Yeah.
The Hammond
Yeah.
organ's got to sound pretty authentic. Acoustic piano's got to sound pretty authentic. That's for my money.
Oh, I agree. It just
Uh,
seems like something's missing when it's not there.
yeah,
And it's not like anybody goes, "Oh, this is better with these modern sounds." It's like, no, no, it's you want to hear
no.
what was on the record or something close. And I love your attention to detail when it comes to those vintage sounds.
Well, I did try because I think that you can't just get a workstation out of the box and expect to get every sound from close to the edge, for instance.
Right. They're not
It
in
ain't going
there.
to work.
Right. What do you think about guys where I mean, you and Rick are guys that obviously have lots of boards around you so you can have any sound you need at the ready without having to
Yeah.
fumble with the menu. Can you ever imagine doing a Yes show where you just had a couple boards and MIDI'd everything and all the patch changes and stuff?
Uh, I could do that, but it would take a lot of preparation because you'd have to kind of zone everything off. I mean, when I did some stuff with Asia in the 90s when we went out there, I would I only had two master keyboards, like full length master keyboards. So and then I had a rack of modules, so I'd zone these things off. So it was only two keyboards on stage. I mean, it was fairly effective, I'd say, but there's certain things like, for instance, when you play the Hammond organ, you really need one keyboard or two keyboards that you can do the sweep on. You've got a keyboard that's zoned. You
Right.
know, you've only got like a little area to do it.
Right.
Whereas, if you're doing one of those big, the paint roller,
Yeah.
one of those,
Yeah,
you
it's
need the
like
whole keyboard to be able to do that.
right. And halfway through
And
it you wound up hitting another sound.
exactly, yeah. Or if you've got, I mean, you could do it technically, but you'd have a lot of changes. But uh, if it's when you're playing a piano, you need the full spectrum of the keyboard.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't say, oh well, I just play this little bit in the middle. You want to hear that whole thing clunking away there. So that's one of the reasons why I have a number of keyboards on stage because I've got things set up to be the piano, things set up to be the Hammond, things set up to be the Maratron, things set up to be mini Moogs and poly Moogs and memory Moogs. So it's all a whole learning curve to be able to because there's a lot of sounds involved in it. It's not just like the old guy in the corner in the jazz band playing the piano. You've got
Oh, yeah,
all these
absolutely.
different things to do.
Um, and your style has always been kind of with the back to the audience, am I right? Is that so they can kind
Yeah,
of see what your hands are doing?
generally speaking, yeah, I think that it's a toss up because you've got two you've got two options. You can either face the audience and have a little head bobbing around and a
Right.
pair of legs under the keyboard, or you can open up the rig and let people see what you're doing. And I think you know I've also been side on as well at some points, but generally speaking, I think it for the most part, I think people say, well, it's quite nice to be able to see, all those keyboards and see what you're doing and see when you hit a certain keyboard, you get a sound out of it. So there's a connection there that people can relate. I mean, it's not like a guitarist with his back to the audience. Like, I don't know who's the guy who's Alan Holdsworth, or whoever. I don't know,
Yeah.
or Jeff Beck.
Well,
When it comes to
it makes me think of Miles Davis. He did that
yeah,
a lot.
yeah. But there again, if you got the back to the audience as a guitarist, you can't even see what you're doing on the guitar. So it's like, but with the keyboard, you can see the what I'm playing.
Yeah. And what was the thought process behind the whole string of keyboards, like in the early 80s with Asia, where you're running back and forth? Did you just feel like you needed a little exercise so you'd work it into the show?
Yeah, I could probably do that now. No, I think it was more to do with the fact that Michael Tate, who I had mentioned earlier, who was the original Yes set designer and lighting guy, he he was also involved with Asia because when we rehearsed there, and it was his idea really. He said, "Look," he said, "You got all those keyboards, and I don't know where to put them." So he 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 said, "Why don't we put them in a great big line?" And I said, "I'm not going to be able to play these keyboards in a line." I said, you know, can't play two keyboards at the same time like that." He said, "Oh well, he said you just have to stack them up and run along." So he came up with this stuff that was above Carl, which was uh, this high tensile stuff that um, it supported the weight of all the keyboards. So Carl's drum riser could go underneath the keyboard rig,
Okay.
and it was pretty groundbreaking stuff. The drum riser came out from underneath the keyboards, and we had these two kind of runways up to the keyboard rig. Uh, so I think it was more to do. Yeah, it's more to do with staging than anything else. But I think it had quite a lot of people saying, "Was this overkill?" You know, and I saw quite a lot of letters in Keyboard magazine at the time saying, you know, "Why has this guy got so many keyboards? Complete overkill. He don't play them all. You know."
Oh, but yes, he does. Like nothing's up there just for show. It isn't like a guitar player with 20 Marshall cabinets and he's only using one.
No,
It's
I mean, I think I had about 28 keyboards up there at one time,
oh,
which is
wow. Boy, I hope you
a
paid
lot.
your roadies well. That's a
Yeah,
lot of
I
stuff
had
to
to have
set up.
two. Yeah, one guy couldn't have done it. I had to have two guys.
I
And
can
of course,
imagine.
because there's certain things as we talked earlier, there's certain things were running in stereo. So I, you know, I had these two great big Soundcraft mixers that were running all the whole keyboard thing. I mean, how it managed to stay together, I don't know. They're transporting a Mellotron all over the place, and the Fairlights, with the original cases, that was had all these cars, and the cars would come loose, and the guys would have to put it all back together again before every show. It was quite some quite some effort.
I can imagine some of those boards were rather fragile. And
Oh yeah,
it's all traveling probably wasn't, the best thing for some of them. Some probably travel
no,
better
no,
than others.
no. I'd usually have at least one thing out, uh, at the sound check, and they'd try and fix it up. But yeah, it's amazing, really. I mean, I sort of I look back on it and I think I don't know why I did that. That was pretty crazy stuff.
Well, I think it looks great. I was
Yeah,
watching the Live in Japan footage a couple days ago, and I was just
yeah,
like, wow, he really did have them spread out there.
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. That was
Very
cool.
interesting. Um, I have a little list of questions here. How much more time do we have? Maybe 20 minutes?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
Okay, cool. All right. I have a list that I made and I haven't really looked at it yet. So let's see here. Um, do you still have a Fairlight in working
yeah.
condition? No?
No, I got rid of that. I got the thing was that it was getting so expensive to store the stuff because it would take up so much space, and uh, it was starting to get a bit tired. The they did another version of it, which was the Fairlight 2 series, and I kind of thought, well, by that time there was other samplers coming out that were, the Iakais and things like that, were starting to, become pretty easy to manage, and the Fairlight was still very. You had to have the keyboard, and you had to have the frame, and the TV and everything, the monitor. So it was all, it was all getting very complicated, and so I can't remember what they did with it in the end. They just kind of sold it off to
Sold off
somebody,
then.
and there may well be someone out there who's got one operation. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I've heard rumors of a new Buggles album. Any truth to that?
Well, I was due to go and see Trevor a couple of weeks ago, but because we've been shut down and locked down here, you can't go out of your zone, as it were.
Yeah,
So certainly in where I am in South Wales. So that put a bit of a kibosh on that. But we've had a few things in the past where uh, we've assembled some ideas. So it's just really a question of when we can actually get together again.
yeah. Do you remember the first time you heard Video Kill the Radio Star? Am I right that it was written by another writer besides you and Trevor?
Yeah, Bruce Woolley. Yeah, well,
Yeah,
there are three of us. And when you say the first time I heard it, the first time I heard it on the radio, or the first time I heard the idea?
just like heard the idea.
Yeah, I do. It was because I was writing with Bruce and Trevor at the time, and I think uh, Bruce threw up this idea, and then Trevor came up with the lyric, and then we started to craft the song from there. So it was very much uh, an idea. I think Bruce had this three-chord idea, which was the basis of video, but then uh, he left us after we'd written the song. He got offered a solo deal with CBS Records at the time, and so that was just left Trevor and myself, and so we carried on and we started writing more stuff, and the whole idea of the Buggles really came out of all of that.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking at the time that this has got to be a strong song, whatever context we do it. I mean, I remember I did the original demo on a Revox around at my, I wish I still had it, around at my old flat back in probably 1977, something like that. And and I was bouncing the tracks, and I had this very, very rudimentary idea for the demo. And we went in the studio and did a 16-track demo of it, 1978. And at that point, Bruce wasn't with us anymore, so it was just Trevor and myself. And then we started to have all these ideas about creating this more wacky production thing where, it wasn't just a song, it was a kind of a whole production number. And that's how we came about. And I think we knew it was strong. We just didn't know, at that time, you never know, do you? So
No.
in hindsight, you think, well, no one can sit around and say, I've got his hit record and, it's going to be number one all over the world.
Oh, I've got this song that's going to define the next decade.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Nobody thinks that's going to happen. And who came up with the name Buggles and what does it mean?
Well, it originally came about because we were going to be call ourselves the Bugs because we had this idea about these kind of studio creatures, coming out the faders and fiddling with the faders and all this kind of thing. And very much, yeah, it was all part of the whole thing about technology and these guys who were just like studio creatures creating these records, and I think that we were going to be called the Bugs, and then somebody said, I think Terry said, we'll never be as big as the Beatles, and so we said, well, let's call ourselves the Buggles.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's a bit of a pun on the Beatles. They're like the sort of virtual band in the studio making records that sounded real but weren't real.
Video is the most well-known Buggles song. What are a few that you're really fond of that you might point someone to check out the Buggles that only knows Video Kill the Radio Star?
I think one of my favourite ones is one called Johnny on the Monorail, which is the last track on the album, and I think that it's got a very it's got a great atmosphere to it. And the other one I think is Elstree, which is about um, the film studios in the UK. Again, it was based around the same kind of principle of a guy who was a B, actor in the B films, the British B films of the 50s and 60s, who never made it as a top guy, and he was always the fall guy, and he played this part, and he ended up working for the BBC. So it was there's a lot of pathos about some of the Buggle stuff. I think we were where technology was actually uh, you know I suppose you could say putting people down. People's lives were changing as a result of it, and so there's a common theme through quite a lot of the songs that there is this pathos. There's a sadness to it as well as a humorous side.
Okay, very interesting. Um, Totally different subject. No, wait, before we go away from the Buggles, I should say, when did you first meet Trevor and how'd you meet him?
I met him when I was auditioning for a chart act. When I moved to London from music college, I was trying to get work. I got into doing jingles, which was quite handy. But
What's a jingle you did? Can you remember one or the product it was for?
Wrigley's Spearmint Gum.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I did one for that. I did one for furniture companies and all sorts of carpets. You
Hmm.
name it. Um, but it enabled me to do other things that I wanted to do. Because it was a kind of a means to an end in a way. And
Sure.
but I wanted to play live as well, so I answered this ad for a keyboard player for a chart act. Now, the musical Bible then was Melody Maker, where there's a whole column musicians wanted, and people used to advertise if they wanted a drummer or whatever.
Hmm.
So I answered this ad, and Trevor was the MD putting it all together. He was actually as a disco singer called Tina Charles, who'd had quite a few big hits in the disco scene in the mid 70s, and I answered the ad, and I'd been in this fusion band at college, and it was a six-piece band, and there was another keyboard player who played a mini moog, and he had a mini moog, which is pretty unusual for a college student to have a mini moog.
Sure. Pretty
And
pricey.
and I said, "Can I borrow your mini mug? I'm just going to this audition for this band." He said, "Yeah, sure." So anyway, I borrowed his mini mug, and Trevor said, "Wow, that's incredible." He said, "You got a mini mug?" I said, "Yeah, yeah." I turned it. I've got a Salida string ensemble as well, and a Fender Rose. Uh, he said, "That's great." He said, "You got the job." You got the job because I had a mini mug, but uh,
It's like, wait, I borrowed it, but
yeah,
I'll figure something out.
yeah, I'll
Right?
figure something out. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So I got the job in the band, and then we that lasted probably about a year or so. She was touring, and then she went off and got married and had a kid and stopped touring. But at that point, Trevor and myself really started to get a good understanding with each other, and we're a couple of guys from the north of England who try and come down south to make a living. So we had a lot in common, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Quite a team. Even
Yeah,
all these years later, a lifelong friendship. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah. That's a long time,
Yeah,
probably.
how's he been doing lately?
He's pretty good. Yeah, yeah. He's keeping going. I think he's still producing some quite high-flying stuff. He does Rod Stewart, and he does Robbie Williams, and I mean Robbie Williams don't really much in America, but he's a huge star
Oh
in
yeah,
Europe.
familiar with the name.
Uh, and just keeping going. I think he's playing with a Dire Straits tribute band as well, which keeps his bass playing uh, in check. So I think he enjoys doing that.
It's funny you
Um,
mentioned that. I'm playing a wedding, or not a wedding, a church function next month. It's my first gig in like 6 months.
yeah.
I'm learning all the little tasty licks to Sultans of Swing. As
All right. Okay.
yeah, it's pretty nice actually. Very tasty stuff.
That's yeah, he told me actually. He said that he gets a real thrill out of playing this stuff. He's got his own band as well, but they don't do that much because they would have done festivals this summer. But uh, the team, the Trevor Horn band, but he goes out and does the really enjoys playing bass. You know, it's good for
Yeah.
him to play bass again. So he's kind of, you know, he's produced all these great records over the years, but deep down he's a musician. So he gets a thrill out of going out there and playing the bass.
Do you ever hear any Chris inspiration in Trevor's bass playing?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think he's such a great admirer of Chris's playing. I think that he would say, I can't hold a candle to him, but he's I think he learned quite a bit off him, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Another question. Any memories of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction night?
Yeah, it's a bit strange.
Yeah, I heard it was a little interesting, I guess is
Yeah, it was
one way to put it.
that was a bit odd really because I think that the odd thing was that we were at different tables. So um, there was a sort of inbuilt animosity, between the the ARW camp and the current Yes camp. Mainly because I think that there'd been some kind of adverse comments made about the our Yes and the AR coming from the ARW camp. So there was a bit of friction there. I think that I mean it didn't come to blows or anything, but there was obviously a great divide between them and us, if you like. But
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting. I think Steve and Alan really just weathered it for the sake of you know you know they felt they had to do it, which is fair enough. I mean, why not? They both deserved a place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
and I think probably it was probably about right that the 8 people of Yes that went, were selected by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame were the ones that went through.
Yeah, I guess so. But in hindsight, a lot of people, I mean, it's like yes is in. So
Yeah,
in hindsight, people would probably think that everyone is in. And in my mind, you are. It's like maybe they
yeah.
didn't give everybody a statue, but your band is in there. So
I think what happened was that the I think it was it Parliament of one of those big sort of bands had about 40 members that were in
oh yeah.
uh, were actually uh, involved in it, and I think that they thought, hang on a minute, we better start capping this because you know we're going to have so many people at the induction ceremony, it's just going to go crazy. So uh, I think it was okay, and I think that certainly Yes deserved to be in it. That's for sure.
What'd you think of the performance?
um, I thought it was good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's part of a big box set now of performances from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So it's out there for anybody who wants to check it
Yeah,
out.
I thought that Geddy Lee. It was good of Geddy Lee to come in and do it.
Yeah, he was awesome. I thought he did a
Yeah,
great job, and I'm
yeah,
sure that was a huge thrill for him. He's such a big fan.
yeah. I think there's been a lot of hankering for them to be in for years, and so it was probably about right that they did
Yeah.
get in when they got
I
in.
mean, it's a shame they didn't get in when Chris was still alive because I think
Well,
maybe
that's it. Yeah,
he would have loved it more than anyone. I think in a way.
I think so, and I think that considering that he was the main sort of cog in the wheel throughout the whole of Yes's history, it's a shame that it happened when it did because certainly if you ask me, why is the band Yes still going today? I'd say that one of the main reasons is because of Chris Squire, and
Sure.
the fact that he was there from the very beginning, and the fact he was there in every single manifestation of the band throughout, and I think that he would take a lot of credit for having managed to do that.
Yeah. And there's some talk from the oh, my phone's ringing. Hold on a minute. Let me kill it. Hold on. Just let it go. They'll hang up.
Okay,
Um, Hang on.
don't worry. I'm gonna have to go in five, I think.
Okay, good. Then we better wrap it up pretty
Yeah,
quickly
yeah.
then. I wanted to ask about Heaven and Earth and also ask about the new album. And I was curious your thoughts on Heaven and Earth a few years later. It turned out to be kind of a different Yes album, and I'm wondering if it maybe felt a little rushed in
Um,
preparation, and if that had anything to do with the end result.
I don't think it was rushed. I think it was somewhat ill thought out in some respects because um, I think that we hadn't really reviewed the material in the way that we probably should have done, and I don't think we had that uh, method of playing the backing tracks live together. So it was very much assembled almost on the test bed. So I don't think, for me, Yes's music begins with the rhythm section, and I think that, once you've got that tight rhythm section, then everything that goes on top of that is the pieces can be built on. But I think with that album, we didn't have that basis. And so uh, I thought maybe some of the ideas weren't as strong as they should have been. Um, I don't think anyone played badly on it. I don't think there was any. Uh, I think there's some good spots on there. I think that I just don't think it was probably a cohesive album that really had the kind of musicianship to the fore that maybe you'd expect from a Yes album. And when you listen, even if you listen to Live from Here, you can tell that there's a great kind of thunderous rhythm section going on there, and I think we missed out on that for whatever reason. I don't know. I think that I think we spent too long on certain aspects of it. I don't think particularly Roy Thomas Baker was the right guy to go back to
Did he
as a
even leave
producer.
a mark on it, or you know,
Not
like
really. I think that we put quite a lot of faith in his uh, ability to pull out the best of the musicianship, but it didn't really happen in that way. So I think what we ended up with was really quite a kind of um, level kind of album. It was kind of a lot of the tracks were kind of mid-paced. There was no kind of real edgy stuff on there,
yeah.
and I think that that's what the album lacks. And I think that as I say, there's some good elements to it, but I know that quite a lot of fans were disappointed with it, in some respects because they were maybe expecting a Close to the Edge or or even a drama. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Mm.
So yeah, but I don't think that the next one's going to be much better, and I think that
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's shaping up and what you want it to be?
well, I really look forward to um, expanding. I mentioned the rhythm section before, and I think that I think that's very important that we start at that point. I mean, it's all very well accumulating the song ideas and all the rest of it, but I think that you know once you get that rhythm section right and it's really cooking and it's firing, uh, that's really what Yes is all about. It's got that whole thing, the bass and drums pumping away. Then it inspires the other musicians, I think, to build on top of that, and hopefully we'll manage to do that. When it's going to come out, I don't know. It's still early days yet, and the fact that we're not allowed to be in the same room as it stands at the moment kind of gives us a bit of a disadvantage. But I think that we will come good with it.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to that, and
Yeah.
no hurry. Don't
No, no,
don't rush it out. It's better
no. We won't.
let things germinate as long as possible.
Exactly.
Um, Alrighty. Well, Jeff, it's great to catch up with you. It's always
Yeah.
a pleasure
Great
to
to
see you when
great
you
to
guys come to Atlanta, and
yeah.
it's been a little while, so it's good to catch up one way or another.
Yeah. I hope that we can get out there soon.
I hope so. I'd love
Yeah.
to. I could use a dose of yes about now.
Yeah. Okay.
All
All
right.
righty.
Well,
All
take
right. You take
care.
care. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Stay.
Good luck with the gigs and everything, and keep going.
Oh yeah, you know it. You know it. And I'll
Okay.
keep kicking away with this show too. So stay
Brilliant.
tuned. There's more
Good luck.
coming up. All righty
Okay.
then. Take care, Jeff.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Stay strong.
Ciao. Bye.
We'll see you.
Bye.